And away we go. It's another edition of the Arrowhead Pride Editors Show. My name is Pete Sweeney. I'm the editor-in-chief of arrowheadpride.com, joined once again by my esteemed deputy editor, John Dixon. John, as we record here, week one is almost complete. We're going to get into the Chiefs' 21-20 loss against the Detroit Lions. But, John, we got a big game tonight, and it's two AFC contenders. Do you think the Bills will win, or do you think the Jets announce themselves as a contender and beat the Bills?
You know, this morning I was putting together the our picks for today's game, all the contributors' picks. I'd forgotten that I'd picked the Jets in this game. So apparently I was flipping a coin when I made my choice. So since I don't remember.
Yeah, I think for the first time in a long time, there's some real juice to this game. I don't think the Jets have felt that serious in a long time. And so we have a pretty good game to wrap up week one. I don't even remember what I picked on Tally site. I've been going back and forth all day. I might end up changing it. I had a few late changes over the weekend that ended up being the right call. I changed the Browns money line at the last minute. I got that one right out of nowhere. So I might have to think about this one up until game time. But this is not a Bills or a Chiefs podcast. This is the Arrowhead Pride Editor Show as part of the Arrowhead Pride Podcast Network. Again, the Chiefs coming off that week one loss on last Thursday. So as we bring back, John, marinated takeaways in today's episode, these takeaways are especially marinated. It's not that usual 24-hour marination. These have been marinating through the weekend, and they're ready to hit the grill, so to speak.
Well, I hope so, because otherwise we're going to look really bad, and I don't like that. I just
want
to be on.
Yeah, that's a good thought there, John. First, let's get into the reviews. If you leave us a rating and a review, we'll read it right here on the Arrowhead Pride Editor Show. First one from Chief of the Rockies. Great variety of focused podcasts and viewpoints on the Super Bowl champs. Appointment listening for sure. Shout out to Steve, who keeps it going and makes Pete and the team shine. Thank you for not overdoing it with too many ads, which can make a podcast unlistenable. Questions. How long does Mahomes play, and what's his realistic total Super Bowl victory goal now that he has two in his first 5 years? Can he keep us at a 40% championship win rate? He starts for 20 years. That's 8 championships, knocking off Brady. What percent of a chance do you give that? I think Patrick Mahomes is really special. I think that when you're talking about potentially winning 8 championships, a lot is going to have to do with the rest of the team, and so it's a little bit hard to, I think, put Patrick in a vacuum. We do know, John, because we've done a couple articles about this over the years, that he wants to take the Brady path. So he does want to play into his 40s should his body end up letting him. So that at least would buy him the time should the Chiefs remain competitive. Right now he is 27, so quick math tells me that's another 18 seasons of Patrick Mahomes. I tend to think he gets close, and if I think if he can get in the range of 4 to 5 championships, he at least enters the conversation. You're right, though. I think he would need 8 for a slam dunk. This is the best quarterback ever, just because in America it seems like you're always defined by championships.
You know, I'd just make this point too. I get tired of people talking about Tom Brady's wife making all this money, and therefore he was willing to take cheaper contracts with the Patriots. I get tired of that because, first of all, I don't really believe it. Right. I think it's just something that people throw out there because it seems to make sense. But I'll just point this out. I think there's a pretty good chance that Brittany Mahomes is going to be pretty rich on her own right. And, you know, as the owner of a significant participant in that soccer team. And so maybe that's what's going to happen with Patrick Mahomes too. There's going to come a point where he doesn't really care about money. So I'll just go along with that argument and say Brittany might do the same thing.
Not that we get into too many personal lives in this show, but now she's an ex-wife for Tom Brady. So all those years of saying, "Oh, look at his wife and what she's providing him." We don't know the details of their divorce, but I imagine there had to be some kind of prenup. So now he's got his own money, but it seems like he has plenty. He's owning a couple teams, including.
Which reminds me, I never knew until this weekend that Bill Belichick had a girlfriend. Did you know that? I didn't know that. I could
Yeah.
never even.
When you're that successful, the ladies flock, and Bill is someone by his side there. All right, let's get to the next review. Amazing show. Thanks to Pete and John for an awesome show. Also, thanks to Serta. I like the Great British Chief show too, but the editor's show is insightful and sometimes funny. I agree with Pete about the O-line, even if others don't, and wonder if you can give us a top 46. Maybe put it on the website after the 53 is announced. Who would dress? I guess this review came before. Who would dress in Week 1 against the Lions? Thanks, and as always, go Chiefs. John, as you have said a number of times, it's not necessarily a 46 man anymore. You actually told me that at the beginning of this year. Can you very briefly just explain that this is a number that is subject to change just based upon how you build your 46, your game day roster?
That's right. They increased the limit from 46 to 47 with the 2020 CBA. And I think in most cases, teams will dress 47 players. I believe the Chiefs dressed 47 on Thursday, as a matter of fact. But if you have 8 offensive linemen dressing, you can have one more. You can have 48. So that's basically designed to allow teams to dress one more offensive lineman so that they're out there with more than 7 guys, like the Chiefs did on Thursday. But I never have done an analysis of it to see how often it happens. But that's the rule.
That would take a lot of time. That seems like an off-season project. By the way, that came from Saul Guy 32. So I hope you learned something from our expert here, John Dixon, teaching you about the 46-man roster. All right, last one. I love all the shows on the AP network. Pete's always asking for reviews, and I've been procrastinating since last season. I can't say I have a favorite show, as they are all amazing. I check my phone daily for the podcast feed for that day's show to come out. As a big Chiefs fan, I love the analysis and the humor on all the shows. If the most entertaining set of podcasts I listen to. Keep up the great work. Thank you for that. Wow, no question
very
there.
Nice.
So appreciate all the reviews. As we've said, if you leave us a review on Apple iTunes, and especially if you leave us 5 stars, we will read it on the Arrowhead Pride Editor Show. We encourage you to leave reviews all the time. It helps us get more listeners like yourself as you take in this program. All right, we are going to go right to the sound here. Here's what we're doing on this show over the next hour or so. We're going to talk about the Travis Kelce injury because it seems to be the biggest thing happening right now in the walls of the Chiefs kingdom. We'll go through the 3 big quotes from Andy Reid from the press conferences. You can always get that full press conference on From the Podium, but we'll take in the 3 biggest ones here. We have our world famous Marinated takeaways coming up after the break, and then we'll go through a quick round through of the news that happened over the past week or two since we last had an editor show. We didn't have one last week, so it's good to be back with you today. But there was, as the Chiefs were off on Sunday, enjoying, maybe not enjoying because you're coming off a loss, but taking in their mini bye, there was an update to tight end Travis Kelce, who did not end up playing because of that hyperextended knee. This was from Fox Sports' Jay Glazer.
Well, actually don't know how big of a bullet they missed on Travis Kelce when it first happened. They actually thought there was a tibial plateau fracture, which is a fracture in the leg, would have put him out for the year. Instead, he just had a really deep bone bruise. They had to pull out 45 cc's of blood. Now, yesterday, they actually put him in a stance and wanted to see if it swelled after. They were good. Today, as we speak, he's at the facility working on the muscles around it. That test is passing as well. Tomorrow, they're going to try and run him. As long as it doesn't swell, he'll play next week.
I don't know if we play next week, Jay. Appreciate the update, but if there was any kind of fluid removed from the knee, I feel like that, to me, is an indication that they could be cautious again. Since this happened, I've kind of been saying week 3 feels like a definite. I'm still feeling like it might be up in the air for week 2. Not to say that I'm a medical expert. I know that he wanted to play on Thursday night, but if they're draining the knee and running all these tests, you wonder if they continue to be conservative. They certainly could use him against the Jacksonville Jaguars, who I see as a contender in the AFC. But I don't think, John, that you want to necessarily push it and lose him for more extended time.
I totally agree with that. I think we learned one thing on Thursday is that the team needs Travis Kelce as it's now composed. And so you want to do whatever it takes to get him back for the most games. And if that means he misses a couple of early games, well, that's the way it has to be.
Yeah. We won't really know more about this until Wednesday, John, is when we get that first official injury update as we go into what is the week 2 matchup of the Chiefs taking on the Jaguars. It does seem that if Kelce is available and trending to play, meaning going to be off the injury report, he will speak to the media this week. So if you end up seeing Kelce speak to the local media, then likely means he's trending in the right direction to play on Sunday. But I believe it's very much wait and see right now, even after that positive report from Jay Glazer. All right, let's get into head coach Andy Reid's Monday Zoom presser. I said it before, say it one more time. You can get the full presser on from the podium, which is also available right here on the Arrowhead Pride podcast network. We're not going to play for you the answer to my question I asked about run blocking. I don't think Andy particularly loved me questioning how the run blocking was doing, but we did get some other good quotes I thought from Reid. The first on Kadarius Toney, who has been a target, an easy target for fans across the league after a 3-4, depending on how you look at it, drop performance on Thursday night. Here was Andy Reid on KT.
You know what, Adam? I would probably take the blame on that. I mean, the kid, when I said that after the game, I meant that. He missed all the training camp from honestly the first punt return pre-practice on through. So he literally had no training camp until just the last few days when we got back here. He did some, and we measured that. We didn't give him a lot. But with that, I thought him getting in the game was important. To be fair, I've got to kind of look in the mirror on that one. That I probably didn't put him in the best position there because he doesn't drop the ball. I mean, that's just not his deal. He's a very, very secure catcher. And I just think that the only way we're going to get him back is playing him. I think this week will be different than the last week, but I thought it was important that he got in the game, got caught up on the speed. But I probably put him in bad positions, in primary positions there, and especially later in the game. He's still getting his legs back and all that bit. So,
are there things you need to do with him to kind of get him back on that path? Get him.
Yeah, I think he's had some time here now to keep working, which I think will benefit him. Getting in that game, I thought was an important thing. I mean, that part was important. Putting him in the positions I did, I probably shouldn't have done that. But I think you'll see better as we go down the road here from him.
So it sounds like Andy Reid doesn't regret necessarily playing Toney, but putting him in what would be the first read on plays for Patrick Mahomes. And even though he was able to garner the separation, which we've become used to seeing from him, just not ready to be thrown into the fire, so to speak. And I guess Reid is self-scouting himself a little bit, John, because when you have and keep 7 receivers, maybe it's better to play the 6 guys that were actually in training camp than Toney. But kudos to Reid for understanding that and admitting it. I think sometimes he does just take the blame to shake off the question, but he explained why for a long period there. And I think maybe they felt like they should have eased Toney more back in.
I think a lot of this has to do with Kelce's absence, too. I think that if Kelce is available for that game on Thursday, they don't feel they need Toney quite as much, and they might not have felt as much pressure to put him on the field and maybe would have been more inclined to limit him more than they did. I discovered this morning when I was working on the snap counts, they listed Toney as a starter in the game, but actually Richie James and Rashee Rice both had more snaps than he did in the game. So he was kind of a starter in name only during this game. So they were trying to hold him back some, but I think they would have held him back more and used him strictly as an occasional player if Kelce had been available.
Yeah, and that's also why, at least for this season, while Kelce's still on the roster and expected to be a major contributor, it's tough to really judge the Chiefs' offense on the first game because not having a player like Travis drastically changes the outlook and the attention that different players get. And it's not only not having him, it also could have been a lot different if, say, the injury had occurred over the weekend prior to starting to practice the game plan. When it happens the last day of practice, you kind of have to just roll with the game plan that you had. And the Chiefs got caught there. And I'll have more in marinated takeaways. I got some negative marinated takeaways to do today. I got one positive and 2 negative. So stay tuned for that as we go. Let's keep it on the topic of 7 receivers, though. And Andy Reid asked about wide receivers in general. It seems a little unrealistic to expect that all 7 receivers are going to be able to contribute this year. And Andy Reid was asked if he's looking for 3 or 4 guys to step forward and maybe take the bulk of the snaps. Here was his answer.
And we've got the 3 guys that have been here, and they end up doing, probably the best in the game. And then we've got 3 younger guys that we've got to bring along. And then you have James, who's been in a form of this, but then is really tied into the special teams too. So I think the 3 younger guys, whether it's 4, 8, 19, they're all kind of new in this and learning in games. And as much as we think Kadarius is a seasoned veteran, he hasn't really played a lot. So, but I think you'll see growth from them as we go. We'll just see how that continues to work, but eventually you'd love them all to be, where we want them. So, and then if they separate, they separate. Well, however that works, it works, but I can't predict that part.
It seems like the running back room of last year where Isaiah Pacheco was involved, but he wasn't the starter. And then you got to the middle of the year and then Pacheco was named the starter and was ended up, getting more touches as you go. I think the start here, as Reid said, it's still going to be Marquez Valdes-Scantling, Sky Moore, and Justin Watson because they're way familiar with the offense, and the other guys kind of need to grow into bigger roles. I thought of the receivers that played last game and especially the young receivers. Rashee Rice looked the part. I wonder if he ended up earning some more snaps in one of those top 3 roles as you go here. But again, I think it's going to be some self-scouting, some self-evaluation, and seeing if one of these younger receivers can not only play their way into a role, but understand the playbook enough to a point where Andy Reid trusts them to go. And that's just another John wait and see type of deal.
Yeah, it's interesting that he mentioned Watson as someone who they would depend upon because he's one of the veterans. He actually was right there with Tony in the number of snaps he had in this game. He was at 26% also, along with Tony.
Yeah.
So I find that kind of interesting. But, it's not unusual for the team to have a plan to, use this receiver, this amount, this receiver, this amount, and so on, and then for it to play out a little bit differently during the course of the game. And that may be what happened there.
Yeah, it looks like they used a lot of these 2 wide receiver sets, and it has always been since training camp began, Sky Moore and Marquez Valdes-Scantling. So,
right.
You got Justin Watson kind of next there, as you were mentioning, with Tony and Rice and in that second type of tier, at this stage. Moore had a tough evening, and I think a lot had to do again with Kelce not being there. I feel like Moore's night's completely different if Travis Kelce's drawing the usual attention and opening up the field as much as he does on a regular basis. But we will see if Moore can rebound in next game. 3 targets, no catches, only the 4 rushing yards for Sky Moore. All right, last point from Reid in our little glimpse here at the press conference. This was a hot topic among fans, I think, because Chris Collinsworth just couldn't stop talking about it. The jump step from Jawan Taylor of getting a little bit of an edge on the opposing defensive line by jumping the snap a little bit. Here were Reid's words.
Yeah, so he works on that hard. He gets it pretty close at times and sometimes too fast. And so we've got to make sure it's not too fast because then that obviously hurts the team. So, but he takes a lot of pride in that and works very hard at that to try to make sure that he gets off well. And, you watch the rest of the games this weekend. I mean, that's with these defensive ends and the way they can roll, that helps you get into position, a tick quicker and that, but you don't want to be offsides. That's for sure.
Yeah, I just wonder about this going into this weekend because you could bet a lot of the referees across the league were watching Thursday Night Football just like everybody else. And it was a national game. They couldn't stop talking about it. And now you have his former team. I think I'd mentioned this on the Arrowhead Pride Report, but his former team, where he spent the beginning of his career, knows that he tends to push it a little bit, if you want to say, push to the snap a little bit. The Jaguars are going to be in the ref's ear early, so I think he's going to have to be even slightly better at this next week to avoid a false start. He ended up taking a false start at the end of this game. Only the one on the night. They would have liked to see him called for more, but only the one on the night, John.
Yeah, there's a couple of things about this. I didn't watch a lot of game action yesterday. I watched the red zone for, I don't know, an hour or so yesterday afternoon towards the end of the late afternoon games because there were a lot of interesting games coming to interesting conclusions there. And I noticed that there were more than a few offensive linemen who were pushing the envelope here, lining up back away from the line in order to get an extra step on the pass rusher. So Taylor's not the only guy who's doing it, but I also think it's important for us to recognize that the angle from which we see most of the play in the game is not the angle where you can really judge whether he's in the right spot or not. And they have officials on the field who are in exactly the right spot to tell whether he's in a position that he should be in. So I think we need to try and avoid second guessing those guys, those line judges, too much, because I think it's pretty easy to misread the situation from an above and behind or ahead angle, which is what we usually get on the TV.
Well, yeah, and especially with all those 100 to 200 rabid Jags fans, if they exist, screaming this week, he's gonna have to be even better. So I think it is something to watch heading into this game.
Sure.
I do think they're going to be a little bit stingier. So we will see how it goes for the right tackle. Again, I'll mention it one last time. You can get that full press conference right now from the podium right here on the Arrowhead Pride Podcast Network. When we come back, the moment you've been waiting, I know you've been waiting since February for this. It is the world famous Marinated Takeaways. Stay with us. Stay with us. Back here on the Arrowhead Pride Editors Show. I said before the break, I know you've been waiting for these. They've been marinating all off season, these takeaways, and finally we get a game, and they have the 4 days of marination, particularly in this game. It's a tough loss for Kansas City. A tough loss, a 21-20 loss in front of the world on opening night. John, I know you've been thinking about this game these past few days. What jumped out in your mind? We'll start with you.
I thought it was interesting. Most of mine seem to be focused on what we assumed ahead of time and compared to what actually happened. And on this one, I think a lot of people were expecting the Chiefs to run the ball more. With Travis Kelce out, I think people figured, well, the Chiefs, they've got this great interior offensive line. They've got these two tackles who are pretty good. We're going to see him run the ball more, so they have to depend on Travis Kelce's replacement quite so much. And they didn't. They ran almost exactly the same percentage of running plays as they did all of last year in this game. So they really just did what they normally do, at least in that respect. We always come into these situations where you think, well, Andy Reid's going to run the ball more in this game, and he never does. Yeah. Maybe we should just stop predicting that.
Well, I had alluded to it, and you'll hear it from the podium if you go back and listen, but the run blocking was not especially good in this game. I felt like the defensive line's push from the Lions was not allowing the Chiefs to really operate in that fashion, and Andy Reid doesn't need much convincing to give up on the run game. And so I think you saw a little bit of that. We'll have to see if it can get more in a groove. I've said it so many times before, but it seems like the offense, even from a passing standpoint, is cooking a lot better when they can seemingly get early runs and early gains. It feels like it really opens things up. And you certainly didn't see that in this game with the offense stalling and really, a sluggish first quarter that ended up seeing the Lions take an early 7-0 lead that the Chiefs had to kind of battle back from. And so, yeah, I'm with you. I like to see the Chiefs use the run game and not really forget about it, but I feel like we're always talking about the same thing in that regard. All right, I'll go to my first marinated takeaway, and this is I have three. I have a more positive one and two kind of on the negative side. So let's start with some positivity here on Monday. I think as bad as the Chiefs played here, I think they probably win it 7 out of 10 times, maybe 8 out of 10. They made so many mistakes in this game. Think about all the drops. Those can be one mistake each. Think about the questionable play calling. Like as much as Andy Reid thought the handoff from Blake Bell to Rashee Rice was a good idea. I bet you he wishes he could have called something else in that position. He ended up having to go for it on 4th and 25. What if you take that shot when it's 4th and 2? And I know that Jared, on our new product, our Arrowhead Pride Premier, he mentioned that the turning point of this game was them not going for it on 4th and 2 and instead kicking the field goal, going up 6, as opposed to what could have been 10. And then it's an entirely different game in that sense. I think there were a number of problems with the protection, as I mentioned, a number of problems with the run blocking. The defense certainly made mistakes. Pretty nice night for the defense, but I think there were certain times that they wish they could have had something back there. What I'm saying by outlining all these mistakes is if 1 to 2 of these go in a different direction, the Chiefs win. And I just feel like they were a better team, but a lot of stuff went wrong. And it reminded me less of a game in which like a Bengals or a Bills comes in and takes it from you, as we've seen in the past with the Chiefs playing and competing. It was more to me of like that Colts game last year where it was just like a complete disaster. And the unfortunate thing is that it happened in the first game. So now the Chiefs are staring at a less than 500 record. But I know it sounds crazy, but I do think they win out of 10 times. If we lived in a simulation, John, I got them at 7 or 8 out of 10 in winning this game.
Who says we don't live in a simulation? I don't know what you're talking about. I don't know what you're talking about there, Pete. Goodness gracious.
Yeah.
No, I think you're exactly right. I must have said 100 times over the weekend after the game, when people would ask me about it. And of course that happens. I'm sure it happens to you too, that everybody you know asks you about stuff like this after a game. And I said many, many times, if you told me the Chiefs would have given up 14 points to the Lions offense in this game, which is what they did, the Chiefs would have won this going away. You just don't expect that the offense is going to have as many problems as it did, and you don't expect there's going to be all those drops, and any one of those plays going a different direction, any one of those calls going a different way. I think Jared made a good point about that 4th and 2 situation. The Chiefs win this game, and they came pretty close to winning it the way it was. So I think it could have played out much differently, and we talking about it a lot differently now with just 1 or 2 things being slightly different.
Yeah, and I don't think you would have felt great about the way they played no matter what. Like, let's say they were just able to like gut it out and win this game it would have ended up being by 2 points against the Lions. I think that you just would be writing it off and saying, well, Kadarius was rusty, Travis was out, at least we won ugly, and you wouldn't even be thinking about this game all that much, but not how it played out. And now you're seeing a little bit of that classic Kansas City panic mode heading into week 2. It's a pretty good Jags team. Like I said, I'm intrigued about this game, and 0-2 is not out of the realm of possibility now. But I just, like I said, I go back to this week 1 game, and again, more of a perfect storm than a sign of like the Chiefs are suddenly not a playoff team or anything.
Yeah,
like
I'd agree with that. Yeah, more like a perfect storm than a disaster. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. All right, John, let's go to your second Marinated takeaway here.
Well, another thing that we talked about a lot before the season began was the situation with kickoffs and how Dave Toub would respond to it. And he talked about there being a lot of squib kicks. And he talked initially like the Chiefs are going to be very aggressive on kickoffs and return them, even if they didn't have to, when it might be smarter not to return them. And in this game, there were 9 kickoffs, and every single one of them was a kickoff through the end zone for a touchback. I did a quick, this isn't something you can look up real easily, but I did a quick rough look up this morning. It looks like there were 33 returned kickoffs in the NFL up through last night. And that's on 145 kickoffs. So that's 23% returned. Last year in week 1, there were 155 kickoffs, 47 of which were returned for 30%. So the number of returned kickoffs has dropped about, maybe close to half of what it was. No, that's not really the way to put it. That would be 30% to 23%. That's maybe a third of what it was the year before, or 2/3 of what it was the year before. So, a decrease, but not a huge number. Tobe always says that Butker can kick it out of the end zone at will, and that certainly seemed to be the case over this weekend. And I would guess that most NFL place kickers can do that as well. So maybe we're just going to see a lot of touchbacks this year. Maybe that's the way it's going to play out. We'll just have to see.
I still think the end of this next year is going to be the XFL kickoff coming to the league, because I think they still want to have that play. You're seeing now what's going to happen with folks just kicking the ball out of the end zone and kind of eliminating it, and it seems like a much safer solution. So we'll see how it goes, but I just think this will be a 1-year issue or problem, failed test that ends up changing the kickoff pretty significantly, but at least it'll keep it in the game, which I think is a very exciting part of the game that you don't really want to lose. Okay, my next Marinated takeaway. Again, picking on the Chiefs a little bit here, but we mentioned Andy Reid, and you actually just heard Andy Reid explaining that it was on him that the Chiefs used Kadarius Toney. I'll extend that to the defensive side. What was L'Jarius Sneed doing in this game? He was not ready. He just didn't look like the player that we are typically used to seeing. He, like Toney, essentially missed all of training camp as he was dealing with knee swelling. He ended up having 4 missed tackles in this game. His coverage was not great, one of the worst coverage grades from PFF on the team. And I think he was thrown into the fire, and much like Kadarius on the other side, probably shouldn't have been in the game. And I'm going into your part of this, John, because you do our snap counts. Jalen Watson didn't even really play, and not to say that the defense suffered too much because of it, because as you eloquently mentioned, John, they only ended up giving up 14 points. But if a healthy player is playing in place of Sneed, is it 7? Is it 0? Do things go differently? I wonder about rushing Sneed back as well.
Well, he was one of the Magic 4. If Steve Spagnuolo is doing the defense the way he wants it to, there's 4 guys who are on the field for every snap, and he was one of them. So the Chiefs didn't feel that they needed to hold him back any, or they would have. But instead, they had him out there for every snap, and he doesn't seem to have held up his end of the bargain there. And I'm not, making that as a complaint against the guy. He's injured. He's not at 100%. It's not his fault. But I'll agree with you that maybe they should have maybe given Jalen Watson some time, because he had no defensive snaps. All of his work was on special teams. And so that was kind of a surprise to me that they couldn't put him out there for a while.
So I don't know and I'll just extend this point. I wasn't even planning on talking about this, but one snap on defense, after really being one of the go-to players for the Chiefs last year, you watched the Chiefs try to look at Najee Johnson early on in training camp before he tore his ACL, almost as a starter. And then as you went on here, they would rather Shamari Connor, who you saw inside a couple times, play the nickel than even really considering Jalen Watson to even come in the game. So his fall from grace has happened fast. And you got to talk to Dave Merritt, the defensive backs coach, and Steve Spagnuolo during training camp, and they were sort of alluding to first-year players, now second-year players, taking a step back. I think we're seeing which second-year player they were referring to in those ominous quotes. And I don't know if Sneed is like, if Sneed is 100% and ready to go, he's one of the better players on the team. It just didn't seem like he had his feet under him. Same thing that you could say about Toney. So I don't know. I wonder about that call. The Chiefs have had some unfortunate circumstances when it comes to injuries, both during training camp and obviously with Kelce this week, that you weren't expecting. So I think it really certainly played into that as well. All right, John, let's go to your final Marinated takeaway.
Another thing that we always talk about going into the regular season is Dave Tobe's influence on the roster.
Mr. Dave, yeah.
Dave. And we don't always know, looking at it from the outside at the time that the initial roster release, but by the time the season starts and you can see which players are out there on special team snaps, you can kind of see which ones are on the roster because of Uncle Dave's influence. And this year it looks like it's Cam Jones and Jack Cochran, 2 linebackers. Those guys are out there not getting defensive snaps at all, but are playing outsized roles on special teams. In fact, 4 of the 9 top special teams players are linebackers. We've got Jones and Cochran, and also Leo Chenal, and I'm not thinking of the other fellow's name now. I have to look on my chart so I know. All the way down to special teams, John.
Chanel.
Oh, Tranquil is the 4th one, right? Yeah.
Okay.
And he didn't get a lot of snaps on defense, but Chanel did, and he actually got quite a bit of snaps on the whole because of that, getting defensive contributions and also a lot on special teams. But Cochran and Jones are the 2 that made the team basically on special teams.
Yeah, well, we were stunned that they kept so many linebackers. It ended up being 6 at the deadline, and we thought also too in transactions to follow that it would wind up probably being Jones that went back down, but it wasn't. And they just ended up keeping the 6, and I think you're right. I think a big part of that was special teams. All right, I'm getting to my final marinated takeaway, and again, 2 negative ones here with the 1 positive one. The Chiefs maybe, and I'm just asking the question here, like, did the Chiefs maybe make a mistake by not taking a tight end in this tight end heavy draft? That life after Travis Kelce doesn't look so rosy at this stage. I think we expect a little bit more from Noah Gray. I think he did all right. I think it's a tough position to be in to fill the shoes of Travis Kelce. But it does seem like John, is a better fit for that blocking tight end, that number 2 guy. Whereas you got a glimpse there to life after Kelce, and it wasn't great with what I think you need out of the position in this offense. And I know that you needed several other positions. I know the Chiefs ended up getting Felix Anudike-Uzomah, who, by the way, had a really nice first game. I think you saw some promising signs from him. But I just wonder, as the Chiefs are right there, and I know they had toyed with maybe trading back, whatever like that, but then in the second round, right after they pick, you see Sam Laporta, Michael Mayer, Luke Musgrave go off the board, Luke Schoonmaker later in the round. And granted, it's week 1, and we'll see if those guys pan out. Not to say that everyone's going to be necessarily a Travis Kelce slam dunk. But I wonder if in the future years here that you start to maybe see the Chiefs considering taking what would be a tight end in one of these top premium rounds, just because I think you want to get that guy into place prior to Travis Kelce getting too old and maybe teetering with that retirement decision.
Well, I think that makes perfect sense. What you're saying rings a lot of bells just exactly the right way. But I would always point out that one thing that Andy Reid does well is make use of the players that are available to him at a given time.
Right.
And I'm not sure that he necessarily has to have a top quality tight end who has a big role as a receiver on a team. I think there's a lot of ways that he could do it, having a tight end being just one of them. And I would wonder if what ends up happening is that the Chiefs change their focus a little bit as tight end, as Travis Kelce moves on, starts making his way out of the league, which he's going to do sometime in the next few years. So I don't know that it necessarily requires the team to find another tight end like him. Certainly they could do that and have a player like Kelce and perform in the same kind of role, but maybe they'll just end up doing it some other way. It's entirely possible with Andy Reid. You just don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I don't disagree. I think the Chiefs tried to make it work on the fly, which didn't help them either.
Sure.
Right? They had 48 hours after realizing that there's a pretty good chance that Travis Kelce is not going to play. But it's just such a useful guy. It's such a useful weapon in the offense.
Yeah.
I just think you would ideally, before he's not productive anymore, which who knows, maybe he's productive for another 2 to 3 years, but ideally get somebody into place that he can take under his wing and is a little bit closer to what Kelce can do than Gray, who again is just another solid number 2 tight end. But I think we learned that he's not going to be close to Kelce in that reliable offensive weapon part the other night, which is said. I mean, I think some of us thought, okay, let's see what Gray can do. I being one of them, I thought Gray might be able to jump into the fire and give you something close to Kelce, but it just was not the case on Thursday night. All right, that's it for the world famous Marinated takeaways. When we come back, we will do a news roundup. You're listening to the Arrowhead Pride Editors Show. Back here on the Arrowhead Pride Editors Show, John, even in a loss, there was a little bit of good news when it came to the injury list. We mentioned it's wait and see on Travis Kelce when it comes to week 2. We'll get our first injury report of week 2 on Wednesday afternoon to start to get a little bit more clarity as to where he stands. But the good news, John, was that there's no other injuries in this game. And I think that's always a good sign. And especially with the players that we're talking about, the players that will have to play well for the Chiefs to return to the Super Bowl in Kadarius Toney and L'Jarius Sneed, they, as they get more comfortable, will have to play better as you go here. And I think no injuries in a 17-game season, even in a loss, is a very good sign moving forward to week 2.
Oh man, I think that's a totally underrated comment there. That has always been an underappreciated part of success in the NFL is having depth in case you have injuries, or not having injuries, period, so that your depth can, take the season off. And so it's really always a really good piece of news to come out of a game and not having the additional injuries. So that was very, very welcome today.
John, I want to bring up Chris Jones. We didn't have a podcast last week, and there was this impromptu press conference, which I thought was a little bit weird. Then we see him next to his fellas there at the game in the stadium when
the Sopranos.
He's actually a member of the Goodfellas. That he's actually a member of the roster still, even though he's on the did not report list. He's not a member of the 53-man roster, but he's still within the organization. And I have never seen anything like that, where a player understandably is in a contract negotiation. I don't blame him completely for that. But to come to Arrowhead and watch the game there in a suite, and they're panning to you every time there's a defensive problem, and they're bringing you up on the broadcast, and you can only control, you can't really control what you look like, but it almost looked cartoonish with very clearly these two big agents next to you that sort of protecting you from talking to anybody else in the stadium. Like, don't get any ideas, Chris, like that type of thing. My colleague from 41, Nick Jacobs, mentioned that that Jones should blink twice if he's being taken hostage or something. Completely bizarre. I don't think it helped his stance among fans to be in the building and to be watching the team after all the things that you've kind of said. Andy Reid did say during the press conference that the communication remains ongoing, but very clearly here, the Chiefs are dug in, and I don't think that they're budging. So as many impromptu press conferences that you want to do, as many games that you want to attend to as a fan with your pals eating popcorn, I don't think the Chiefs are bending. I think they feel like they made a good offer. And Chris Jones, to watch that game at Arrowhead, was forfeiting $1.1 million. I think I'm just at a loss when it comes to the strategy. It's weird. It's bizarre. He says at this press conference he doesn't want to be a distraction. If that's the case, man, go back to Miami and don't be put on the broadcast 5 or 6 times throughout the game. I am not blaming the player for wanting to make the most money possible, but this was just bizarre, and I don't get the thought process anymore.
I don't either, and I think Chris Jones is a smart guy. I think he's, whatever's happening here, I think he's being advised to do it, and I think the advice he's getting is not very good. The press conference was not a good idea. They'd have been better off just canceling the appearance altogether late last week. They'd have been better off watching the game at home than appearing at Arrowhead. I think all he's done through these actions is to say things that have gotten people worked up, when he's just trying to express how he feels about it, which is perfectly fine. I get it. I'm with him. If he wants to make more money, the world is set up in such a way that you can hold out and ask for a contract extension and hold out in order to create leverage to get one. That's the way the world is set up. That's fine if that's what you want to do, Chris. But to say that it's the same as what other people do when they go in and ask for a raise, well, it's not. And it's not helping your cause to say so. And I think that those things are really, I have to express that everybody I talked to about this over the weekend since the game is very, very unhappy with Chris Jones. And maybe he doesn't care. Maybe he doesn't care if the fans are alienated or angry or whatever. I think he should be. But they're mad. That's my observation from this at this point.
Yeah, and I want to say this too. Like, there's such a thing as game flow. So, like, I know that the defense played well and only allowed 14 points, but if you're telling me that Chris Jones wouldn't have made a 1-point difference, I think you're wrong about that. Like, I think if Chris Jones is there, remember I said I think the Chiefs win 7 or 8 times out of 10. They probably win 9 out of 10 times if Chris Jones is playing in this game, just because it's just a completely different feel. The Lions are probably shut down. Maybe that gives the offense a little bit more confidence, and they're not playing as with as much pressure on their back. Maybe there's a turnover that we didn't necessarily see because Chris Jones wasn't there that reverses the entire game flow and fortune. Like I said, I know that the defense played well, which, by the way, doesn't help Jones and his stance at all. I know the defense played well, but I just think if Chris Jones was playing, the Chiefs are 1-0. Like, I really feel that way. I'm like 99% sure about that. So whatever, I guess that helps his cause in a way. And like I said, I'll say it one more time. I appreciate the negotiation. I appreciate that he wants to be paid, and it sounds like close to the highest player at his position. Whatever, I think there is a case to be made about that. Don't show up to any more games. I don't think it's helping your stance, your cause. I don't think it's helping your team. Which is, if you really care about that, then don't be a distraction. Like, if you want to say I don't want to be a distraction, then maybe just don't be a distraction. Then.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
All right, moving on here, John. You went through the snap counts as we were getting ready to do this podcast. We mentioned the snap counts for Watson. We mentioned the wide receiver snap counts a little bit. Anything else stand out that's worth mentioning here when it comes to snap counts out of this game?
Yeah, we touched on Noah Gray a little bit. I was interested to see how his usage compared to the way Travis Kelce would be used. Last year, Travis Kelce averaged 79% of the offensive snap counts. Noah Gray was on the field for 87% of the snap counts on Thursday night. Kelce exceeded that just one time in 2022. So Noah Gray certainly got the work in that we would normally see from Travis Kelce, but you cannot say that Gray simply stepped into his shoes. He was on the field more often on passing plays, just like Kelce is. But last year, Kelce was targeted on almost 18% of his snaps. And on Thursday night, Gray was targeted on 9% of his. Now, maybe that's because he wasn't open. Maybe that's because he doesn't have the same trust with Patrick Mahomes that other receivers do. But he really did not step into Travis Kelce's role in this game. And as long as Kelce is out, that's going to be a hole that they have to fill some other way.
Yeah, I think they were hoping that it was a little bit better, that it looked a little bit better, but maybe that there was a little bit more separation. Just wasn't there, as I was alluding to before. Anything defensively that stood out when it came to snap counts for you, John?
I was kind of surprised that George Karlaftis and Mike Dana both had snap count percentages in the mid 80s in this game. That's the kind of thing that you would get from two strong starters and normally. So I think that said a lot about what the Chiefs think about those two guys. On the inside, the two guys with the most snaps were practice squad player elevated for the game, Matt Dickerson and Derek Nottie, but they were both under 60%. So there was a lot of rotation going on there with Tershawn Wharton and Keandre Coburn. But as usual, Steve Spagnuolo always has some edge players playing on the inside on a significant number of snaps, and that's who made up the difference on the inside. So that part was much the same, but I was a little surprised to see Karlaftis and Dana get so much work. I might have guessed that Anudike Uzama would have gotten more snaps than he did, but I was pleased that he did as much with his 1 snap and 3 or 1 snap and 4 or whatever it ended up being.
That's another positive that you could take away from the game too. And
yes.
Once again, it's a 1-game sample size. You got to be careful here. However, it does appear that Felix is going to maybe become a contributor far sooner than Karlaftis did. Not to say he's necessarily going to go out there in Jacksonville and look the same. These young players develop in different ways, but at least it's a so far so good situation when it comes to Felix, because the Chiefs need outside pass rush, especially if Jones and his week 8 thing is legit. Like, what a great sign that there's a chance FAU could be a day 1 contributor. So
yeah,
see what ends up happening when it comes to the line and elsewhere. All right, John, we'll wrap up with this. The opening odds versus the Jacksonville Jaguars, just a field goal difference, it looks like.
Yeah, kind of interesting. The last 2 times these teams have played, it's been 9+ points, and the Chiefs won both of those games by 7 and 10 points. They didn't beat the spread one time and then did beat it the second time. Or, excuse me, it was the other way around, the first time and not the second time in the divisional round. And I think that's mostly about Travis Kelce. We saw the line drop a couple of points when Kelce got hurt last week. I think people watched that game on national TV when there wasn't anything else to see and saw what the team looked like without Kelce and came to some conclusions that may or may not be right.
Right.
And so that ends up making the line drop down to a little less than a field goal. I think if Kelce was playing, it'd be more like 5-6 points, I would think, but we don't know whether he's going to play or not, and we'll just have to see how it plays out.
Yeah, I wonder. I feel like it was always going to be close, but I think you're right. If Travis Kelce were healthy and let's say Chris Jones and this negotiation weren't going on, feels like it would be like 4.5 to me, maybe even 5.5 as the Chiefs go down. But there's just so much uncertainty surrounding key players here, and I think the Jaguars looked pretty good themselves in their game. I know that they wasn't a completely blemish-free game. It was sloppy at times, some turnovers and whatnot, but they ended up gutting out a division game. We know how hard it is to win division games. So the Jaguars will be playing a rematch of the playoffs, just like the Chiefs, and we'll see if they can end up upsetting the Chiefs because they are the underdogs, and we'll see if the Chiefs can cover that 2.5 point spread. I'm always eager to see what the movements of the line are at on actual game day as you get closer, because that tends to tell you what the smartest bettors in Las Vegas are doing as those late movements happen. These odds, of course, are always brought to you by DraftKings Sportsbook. All right, John. So that's a show right there. We went through Andy Reid. We went through our world famous. We talked about snap counts and Chris Jones, and we'll continue covering the Chiefs right here on the Arrowhead Pride Podcast Network as we move forward. If you leave us a review, we'll read it at the beginning of this show. It doesn't even have to be a review. You could ask us a question, give us a comment. We'll comment about that right here on the show. We got a full lineup this week. Steve has you covered. And thank you to John. This has been another edition of the Arrowhead Pride Editors Show.